He thought the courtroom was a joke. The charges, the jury, the judge, all of it. 17-year-old Ryan Harker leaned back in his chair, smirking, as the prosecutor listed the words arson and attempted murder. To him, it was all noise. Just another adult trying to scare him. Even when they showed the video, his own voice laughing while the fire burned, he didn't flinch. Not once. But then his mother stood up. She wasn't there to defend him. She was there to tell the judge what she'd been too afraid to say for years. And when she did, when the truth finally left her mouth, the smirk vanished. The whole courtroom went silent. Even the judge's eyes softened before he spoke the words that would end Ryan's arrogance forever. Before we show you how one mother's words changed everything, make sure you're subscribed, turn on that bell icon, and comment below where you're watching from. Because this is one story you won't forget. This story is a work of fiction and not based on real events. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, a smell that never really left these halls, no matter how often the janitors mopped the floors. It was the scent of rules, of history, of people who thought they were untouchable until they weren't. Seated at the defense table was Ryan Harker, 17 years old, tall for his age, hair too long to be neat and too short to hide behind. His chin rested on his palm as he stifled a laugh. The judge hadn't even finished reading the indictment yet. Across the aisle, the prosecutor's voice echoed steadily. On the night of May 14th, the defendant, Ryan Harker, intentionally set fire to a 2008 Ford Explorer belonging to his stepfather, Mark Callan. Ryan snorted under his breath, earning a sharp elbow from the public defender beside him. Sorry, he muttered, but the smirk stayed. In the gallery, a woman sat with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Her name was Laura Harker, Ryan's mother. She hadn't seen him since the night the fire swallowed half their driveway, and her second husband barely escaped the explosion. That was 74 days ago. She had counted. Ryan turned his head toward her once. She looked smaller than he remembered. Older, too. Her hair pulled back and her coat too big for her frame. Their eyes met for half a second. She gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent plea for respect. But he looked away. He whispered to his friend, seated behind him, another juvenile defendant, waiting for his turn. Can you believe this? All this over a stupid car. The bailiff snapped. Quiet! The judge, Honorable Michael Duvall, was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, the type who could fill a room just by standing. He adjusted his glasses, peering down at Ryan. Mr. Harker, do you find these proceedings humorous? Ryan leaned back, unbothered. Not really, Your Honor. Just a bit dramatic, that's all. The courtroom murmured. Duvall's expression didn't change, but the gavel came down once, hard. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on what's dramatic when I decide your sentence. Until then, you will show respect in this court. Is that clear? Ryan shrugged. Crystal. His lawyer buried his face in his notes. The prosecutor, Evelyn Shaw, cleared her throat and resumed. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that this was not a prank. This was an act of rage, deliberate and reckless. And while Mr. Callan survived, another man did not walk away unscathed. Laura felt the words hit her chest like a pulse. The other man, the neighbor who tried to help, still couldn't use his right arm properly. She remembered visiting the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and melted plastic still clinging to her clothes. She hadn't visited her son since. She didn't know what to say to him then, and she didn't know now. Ryan, meanwhile, looked detached, as though this was someone else's story. When the prosecution presented photos of the burned car, the twisted metal reflecting blue courtroom lights, Ryan tilted his head and said to no one in particular, "Looks worse than it was." The judge's pen stopped mid-note. His gaze rose. "One more remark, Mr. Harker, and I'll hold you in contempt." Ryan's grin faltered for the first time, but not out of fear. He just didn't like being interrupted. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. As people began filing out, Laura remained in her seat. She watched her son being led away by deputies, his hands cuffed loosely in front of him, still with that same smirk on his face, as if none of it mattered. It wasn't the smirk of a boy in trouble. It was the smirk of someone who'd stopped believing consequences were real. And for Judge Duvall, that was about to change. The next morning, the air inside the courtroom was heavy with tension, that kind of quiet weight that always comes before truth starts to surface. Judge Duvall entered promptly at 9. The bailiff's call echoed off the paneled walls. "All rise!" Everyone stood, except Ryan, who took half a second longer than the rest. A deputy's hand on his shoulder made sure he got there eventually. The judge settled behind the bench and nodded to the prosecutor. "Ms. Shaw, the floor is yours." Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Shaw stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried the precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. "Your Honor, this case is simple. It's not about a car. It's not about a mistake. It's about anger, the kind that doesn't cool off." She motioned toward the projection screen beside her. With a click, the first image appeared, a driveway swallowed in orange light. The charred skeleton of a Ford Explorer sat tilted toward the curb, the asphalt blistered beneath it. "On May 14th, she continued, the defendant, Ryan Harker, doused this vehicle in gasoline and lit it on fire after an argument with his stepfather, Mark Callan. The explosion ignited a neighboring fence and caused severe burns to a man who attempted to put out the flames." She turned slightly toward Ryan, who stared at the photo, unimpressed. "We will show that this act was premeditated, that Mr. Harker sent messages to friends hours before the incident, bragging that he'd teach Mark a lesson. We will show lighter, fluid bottles with his fingerprints, gasoline residue on his sneakers, and footage of him standing less than 30 feet away as the fire spread." The defense attorney shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. Laura Harker sat 3 rows back, eyes fixed on her son. She still couldn't reconcile the boy she raised with the defendant in front of her. She remembered him at 7, building model cars at the kitchen table, hands sticky with glue. He used to ask her how engines worked. Now she was listening to lawyers explain how he'd set one on fire. The prosecutor's next slide appeared, a photo of a man with bandaged arms and face, skin grafts visible under the gauze. "This is Victor Lang, the neighbor who rushed in when he saw flames outside the window. He tried to pull the hose across the yard but was caught in the secondary blast." Laura closed her eyes. The defense rose for cross-examination. "Your Honor, the defense doesn't dispute the incident occurred," said Attorney Colin Myers, a weary public defender in his 40s. "But intent matters. Mr. Harker did not intend to harm anyone. He acted impulsively, out of frustration, without understanding the danger." The judge leaned back in his chair. "So you're arguing negligence, not malice?" "Yes, Your Honor. My client admits he was angry. He poured gasoline, yes, but he believed the fire would fizzle out. A scare tactic, not destruction." The prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, we have phone footage taken by a bystander showing the defendant laughing while the car burned. That's not negligence. That's satisfaction." Ryan smirked again, reflexively, as if the mention of laughing triggered muscle memory. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering sharply, "Stop that!" But Ryan couldn't help himself. In his head, this wasn't real yet. Court was just theater. The fire was over. The neighbor had survived. The world hadn't ended. Then the judge spoke, and the sound of his voice cut through Ryan's illusion like glass breaking. "Ms. Shaw, we'll see that footage tomorrow, but let me make this clear to the defendant. You may think this is about a single night, but for this court, it's about who you are becoming." The words hung in the room. Laura looked down at her lap. She'd said the same thing to him once, almost word for word, and he'd laughed then too. By the 3rd day of trial, the courtroom had grown used to Ryan's smirk, the small, crooked curve that appeared any time someone mentioned his reckless behavior or lack of remorse. But familiarity didn't make it any easier to watch. Judge Duvall sat high above the room, hands folded under his chin, eyes steady. His patience, though intact, was wearing thin. The prosecution had just finished questioning fire investigator Daniel Grove, who explained that the fire's origin point, the car's gas cap, proved the blaze was intentional. "You'd need open flame and accelerant," he said. "This wasn't spontaneous combustion. It was planned." Ryan muttered something under his breath. The bailiff turned sharply. "What was that, Mr. Harker?" the judge asked. Ryan leaned forward, voice dripping with sarcasm. Just saying. I didn't plan on him being such a bad driver. The car had it coming. Laughter rippled from the back row, one of Ryan's friends. The gavel came down instantly. Order in the court! The laughter died. Mr. Harker, Judge Duval said, his tone flat but cold. If you find humor in this process, you'll find no comfort in where it ends. Ryan only smirked wider. His lawyer hissed, Do you want to go to jail before sentencing? Because that's where this is heading. But Ryan wasn't listening. He was studying the jury. 10 adults who looked at him like a curiosity. To him, they were strangers judging a moment that didn't define him. He thought he could outsmart them. When the prosecution played the footage, the shaky cell phone video showing Ryan standing near the flaming car, laughter audible, the gallery gasped. The boy on screen looked detached from reality, the fire's glow dancing on his face. His voice could be heard saying, That's what you get, Mark. Bet you won't touch my stuff again. The defense attorney stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance and prejudicial effect. Overruled, said Duval. Ryan stared at the screen, jaw tight. He hadn't realized someone had recorded it. In the back row, Laura's eyes filled with tears, not from shock, but from recognition. That voice wasn't angry. It was gleeful. When the video ended, silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector cooling down. Judge Duval looked at Ryan carefully. Mr. Harker, that was you in that video, yes? Ryan shrugged. Guess so. Do you deny saying those words? Nope. Do you understand what that means? Ryan hesitated, then muttered, People say things when they're mad. The judge's tone hardened. You weren't mad. You were laughing. There's a difference. The courtroom was still. For a moment, Ryan's eyes darted toward his mother. Laura wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the floor, hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Something inside him twitched. Not guilt, not yet, but discomfort. The first hint of reality cracking through. Judge Duval set his pen down and leaned forward slightly. Mr. Harker, I've been on this bench for 30 years. I've seen men twice your age cry like children when they realize what they've done. I've also seen boys your age laugh like gods right before they lose everything. Which one are you going to be? Ryan didn't answer, but the smirk finally disappeared. When the bailiff called Laura Harker to the stand, she hesitated, not because she was afraid of testifying, but because she didn't know which version of her son she'd be speaking about. The boy who used to leave her handmade cards, or the one sitting at the defense table pretending not to care. She placed her hand on the Bible, took the oath, and sat. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear. My name is Laura Harker. I'm Ryan's mother. The prosecutor, Evelyn Shaw, nodded gently. Mrs. Harker, I understand this is difficult. We just need you to tell the court what you remember about that night. Laura took a breath. The courtroom watched a woman gather herself piece by piece before speaking. It started with shouting. They'd been fighting all week, Ryan and Mark. Mark was my husband for 5 years. He wasn't a bad man, just strict. He worked long hours at the auto shop, tried to set rules. Rules about what? Mostly respect, she said. He wanted Ryan to help around the house, focus on school, but Ryan took it as control. He'd say things like, You're not my dad, or you just want to boss me around. She looked down at her hands. That night, I heard the door slam. Mark went outside after him. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I smelled smoke. The prosecutor let the silence stretch. What did you do? I ran out. I saw the car on fire, and Ryan... She stopped herself, voice breaking. He was standing there, just standing there, watching it burn. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Laura pressed her palms together until her knuckles whitened. I screamed his name. He didn't even look at me. The flames were getting higher. Mark tried to reach the car, but it exploded. The neighbor, Mr. Lang, ran in to help, and that's when he got burned. She paused, eyes wet but steady. That's when Ryan finally moved. He turned around and said, He deserved it. Mom, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Evelyn nodded softly. What happened next? The police came. They took him away. I wanted to stop them, but I couldn't. I kept telling myself this was a mistake, that he didn't mean it. But when I saw that video, her voice cracked. He meant it. She glanced toward her son. Ryan avoided her eyes, staring at the floor. The prosecutor stepped closer. Mrs. Harker, did you ever think your son was capable of this? Laura hesitated. The hardest question of all. No, not until last year. He started skipping school. He stopped talking to me. I'd find burned notebooks, cigarette butts in his backpack. And when I'd ask why, he'd just say, you'll see. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge lowered his gaze briefly. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his tie. Mrs. Harker, do you love your son? Of course. Do you believe he's a bad person? She blinked hard. I believe he's lost. Do you think he understands what he did? Not yet, she said softly. He thinks this is just another fight he can win. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. When Laura stepped down, she passed within a few feet of Ryan. For a brief second, she reached out, her fingers twitching as if to touch his shoulder, but stopped herself. Ryan didn't look up. The bailiff opened the door for her, and as she walked out, the only sound left in the courtroom was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the judge's clock, counting down the seconds until truth caught up with arrogance. When the courtroom reconvened that afternoon, the atmosphere had changed. The smirk was gone. Ryan sat straighter now, the cuff of his shirt frayed from hours of tugging at it. His mother's testimony had left an imprint, even if he didn't want to admit it. The prosecutor, Evelyn Shaw, rose with a folder in hand. Your Honor, the state would like to introduce Exhibit 27, a series of text messages recovered from the defendant's phone, dated May 14th, between 6:40 p.m. and 8:10 p.m. The judge nodded. Admitted. On the large monitor beside the jury box, a chain of messages appeared in glowing white text against a black background. Ryan Harker. He thinks he can take over my life. Friend, Ethan. You mean Mark? Ryan. Yeah. Keeps talking to me like I'm 10. I'll show him what happens when people try to replace my dad. Ethan. Dude, chill. Ryan. Not tonight. A few jurors shifted in their seats. Evelyn turned to face the judge. These were sent less than 2 hours before the fire began. Then came the next exchange. Later that same night, Ryan. He's going to regret every word he said. Ethan. Don't do anything stupid. Ryan. Don't worry. I'm just lighting up his ride a little. Ryan stared at the screen as his own words glared back at him, each one heavier than it had felt when he typed it. He had meant them to sting, to sound tough. Now they sounded like evidence. The prosecutor continued. We also found a video draft in the defendant's phone cache. It was never posted, but it shows him standing near the car holding his phone, saying, and I quote, "He called me a disappointment. Let's see how disappointed he is when his car's gone." The courtroom went still. Ryan's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. That video was never published. It could have been a joke. Overruled, said Judge Duvall. The jury will decide what it was. Ryan's breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward the jury. 12 strangers now watching him, not as a boy, but as a threat. Evelyn stepped closer. The defense calls this a joke, but this wasn't humor. This was premeditation. He texted about revenge, recorded himself announcing his plan, and then did exactly what he said he would do. She paused, then faced Ryan directly. You wanted him to see it burn, didn't you? Ryan's lawyer snapped. Objection. Argumentative. But Judge Duvall raised a hand. Overruled. He may answer if he chooses. Ryan's voice came low, quiet, more from exhaustion than courage. He deserved it. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Evelyn's expression didn't change. For what? For setting boundaries? For asking you to follow rules? Ryan looked away. His silence said more than any confession could. The judge leaned forward, pen resting against his chin. Mr. Harker, I suggest you consider your answers carefully. Sometimes the words we think make us powerful are the same ones that condemn us. He tapped the gavel once, not in anger, but as a warning. Ryan didn't speak again for the rest of the day. But the jury didn't forget that last phrase. He deserved it. It echoed through the courtroom like the sound of something fragile breaking. Not just a defense, but the illusion of innocence itself. The following morning, the mood in court was somber. No one spoke much before the session began. Even the reporters outside the courthouse whispered instead of shouted questions. When Laura Harker was called back to the stand for cross-examination, she looked tired, drained in a way that went beyond sleeplessness. The prosecutor had already finished her questioning. Now it was the defense's turn to try and humanize the boy everyone was starting to see as a monster. Defense attorney Colin Myers approached gently. "Mrs. Harker, you mentioned that Ryan's father left when he was very young." Laura nodded. "He was 6. Would you say that had an effect on him?" She sighed. "Yes, it made him angry, but it also made him quiet for a long time. I think he didn't know how to show hurt, so he showed anger instead." The attorney nodded sympathetically, pacing slowly. "And your husband, Mark Callan, how was his relationship with Ryan?" Laura looked down. "They tried, but Mark was firm. Ryan saw that as competition. So, would it be fair to say your son grew up without a stable male role model?" "Objection," said Prosecutor Shaw, standing. "Speculative." "Sustained," said the judge. "Rephrase, counselor." Myers cleared his throat. "Did you ever feel that Ryan resented Mark because of his role in your life?" Laura's answer came quietly. "Yes, deeply." The attorney nodded again, turning toward the jury. "Ryan wasn't raised to hurt anyone. He acted out of emotion, not calculation. A child's impulse, not a criminal's plan. It was the only defense left. The hope that the jury might see a lost boy instead of a deliberate arsonist." Then Prosecutor Shaw rose again for redirect, her tone respectful but firm. "Mrs. Harker, may I ask when was the first time you were afraid of your son?" The question landed like a hammer. The courtroom held its breath. Laura's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "When he stopped calling me Mom." The prosecutor tilted her head slightly. "What did he call you?" "Laura," she whispered, "like I was just another person in his way." The silence in the courtroom deepened. Prosecutor Shaw stepped forward. "And when you told him no, when you tried to discipline him, how did he react?" Laura swallowed hard. "He would laugh, not yell, not cry, just laugh, like everything I said was a joke." The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state rests its witness." Laura stood to leave, but Judge Duvall stopped her gently. "Mrs. Harker," he said, "you may step down. And I want to thank you. This court understands how difficult this is." She nodded, barely managing a quiet thank you. As she walked past the defense table, she didn't look at Ryan, but he looked at her. For the first time, his eyes followed her to the door, uncertain, searching. When she disappeared behind the glass panel, he stared at the empty space she'd left, his jaw tight. The courtroom remained silent until Judge Duvall finally spoke. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." As the gavel struck, Ryan's attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, "You're not helping yourself, son. That look on your face, the jury sees it." Ryan didn't respond. His throat felt dry. For the first time since the trial began, the image of the burning car replayed in his mind, not as power, not as revenge, but as noise. He could still hear the crackling sound, his mother screaming, Mark crawling away from the flames, and beneath it all, his own laughter, echoing back at him like a stranger's voice. He covered his face with his hands. For the first time in months, Ryan didn't feel invincible. He felt exposed. The final day of testimony came faster than anyone expected. The jury had heard the evidence, the texts, the footage, the mother's heartbreak, and there was little left to debate. What lingered now was the quiet, the kind that only exists when people know the truth, but haven't yet said it aloud. Ryan Harker entered the courtroom wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd worn 3 days in a row. The swagger that once defined his every step was gone. His smirk, the one that had nearly gotten him held in contempt, hadn't made an appearance since his mother's last words on the stand. When Judge Duvall asked, "Is the jury ready to deliver its verdict?" the foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind but steady eyes, stood. "We are, Your Honor." A folded paper passed from hand to hand until it reached the bench. The judge unfolded it carefully, scanning it once, then again. In the matter of State of New York vs. Ryan Thomas Harker, on the charge of first-degree arson, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. No reaction, not from Ryan, not from the gallery. The judge continued, his voice deliberate. On the charge of aggravated assault resulting in serious injury, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Laura pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She had prepared herself for this, but hearing the word guilty still made her knees weak. The bailiff moved closer, quietly pulling a chair in case she needed to sit. Ryan's public defender whispered, "Will appeal," but Ryan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the bench, on the brass scales engraved into the courtroom's back wall. Judge Duvall looked at him directly. "Mr. Harker, you have now been convicted by a jury of your peers. I'll schedule sentencing in 2 weeks' time." He paused, then added, "Between now and then, I suggest you think carefully about who you were and who you want to be when you walk back into this courtroom." The gavel came down. As deputies approached to escort Ryan away, a strange thing happened. He turned, searching the gallery. His eyes met his mother's for the first time since the trial began. There was no anger there anymore. No smirk, no bravado, just confusion, like a child waking up from a nightmare he didn't understand. But Laura didn't move. She couldn't. She watched him go, the sound of shackles faint but undeniable. She remembered when those hands used to grip her fingers crossing the street, when those same eyes used to light up at birthday candles. Now, they were just empty. Reporters waited outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on the doors, eager for statements. But Laura didn't stop. She walked past them, through the drizzle, across the street, and down the block until she disappeared into the blur of umbrellas. Behind her, the courthouse doors swung shut with a heavy metallic click, the sound of finality. Inside, Ryan sat alone in the holding cell, staring at the blank wall opposite him. The laughter he used to hide behind felt distant now, hollow, meaningless. The verdict had done what no punishment before could. It had forced him to listen to silence. 2 weeks later, the sky over Albany County was the color of old steel. Heavy, unmoving, cold. Inside the courthouse, that same heaviness settled over everyone as State v. Ryan Harker reconvened for sentencing. The crowd was smaller this time. The journalists had moved on, the curious locals had lost interest, but the people who mattered most were still there. The neighbor, Victor Lang, and his wife, the prosecutor Evelyn Shaw, and at the back, Laura Harker, sitting alone. Ryan shuffled into the courtroom, escorted by 2 deputies. Gone was the careless posture, his shoulders slumped. His wrists were bound, and his face was pale, eyes hollow from 2 weeks in county lockup. He didn't look at anyone. Judge Duvall entered, robe swaying behind him, and the courtroom rose. "We are here for sentencing in case CR 4327, State of New York versus Ryan Thomas Harker. Mr. Harker has been found guilty on both counts, first-degree arson and aggravated assault causing permanent injury." He turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Shaw, the state's recommendation." Evelyn stood. "Your Honor, this crime nearly killed 2 men. One of them his stepfather, the other a neighbor who tried to save them. The defendant has shown little remorse and, until this courtroom, treated the entire proceeding like a performance. The state recommends a combined sentence of 12 years, but with transfer to adult custody upon reaching 18. The judge nodded. "Defense?" Ryan's attorney rose, exhausted but still trying. "Your Honor, Ryan is a minor. He made a catastrophic mistake, but he's not beyond redemption. His behavior was reckless, not malicious. I ask the court to consider the possibility of rehabilitation rather than destruction." Judge Duvall's expression remained neutral. "Thank you, Mr. Myers. Before I issue sentencing, I'll allow statements from the victims." The first to stand was Victor Lang, the burned neighbor. His right arm was still wrapped in a light compression sleeve, the skin beneath discolored from grafts. He spoke slowly. "I don't hate him. I don't even think about hate anymore. but every time I look at my hands, I remember him laughing. That sound never leaves you. I hope someday he realizes that a laugh can do more damage than fire. He stepped down. The judge looked toward the gallery. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the court? A pause, then, but a soft voice. Yes, Your Honor. Heads turned as Laura Harker rose from her seat. She walked forward slowly, clutching a folded paper in her hand. When she reached the front, she didn't read it. She just spoke. My son used to build things, she began. When he was little, he'd stay up late gluing pieces of wood together. Cars, airplanes, houses, anything. He said one day he wanted to make something big enough for both of us to live in. Her eyes glistened. And now he burns things instead. Ryan's head snapped up. For the first time, he looked afraid. You think I'm here to ask for mercy, Laura continued, turning toward the judge. But I'm not. I'm here because I failed him. I excused everything. The lies, the anger, the cruelty. Because I thought if I loved him enough, it would fix him. But love without truth isn't love. It's blindness. The courtroom was still. Even the deputies stood motionless. She turned to her son. You laughed at the world like it owed you something, Ryan. But the truth is, it owed you nothing. The people you hurt, they didn't deserve that. And neither did I. Ryan blinked rapidly, trying to speak. But no words came. Laura's final words trembled but clear. He needs to face this, Your Honor. Don't make it easy. Then she walked back to her seat, not once looking back. Judge Duvall took a long breath. His tone softened, but did not waver. Mr. Harker, I was ready to see a boy who made a mistake. What I see instead is a young man who believed nothing could touch him. Until today, the law will teach you what your conscience did not. He glanced down at the sentencing papers. On the charge of first-degree arson, this court sentences you to 10 years. On the charge of aggravated assault, 2 years to be served consecutively, 12 years in total with transfer to adult custody at 18. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp finality that seemed to echo through Ryan's chest. As he was led away, Laura's voice, soft, trembling, reached him through the shuffle of feet and the rustle of papers. Goodbye, Ryan. For the first time since his arrest, he didn't laugh. He only whispered back, Mom, before the door closed behind him. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet now. Reporters had long since packed up, and the sound of the closing door was replaced by the dull hum of fluorescent lights. Laura Harker stood by the bench just outside the courtroom, holding her coat but not putting it on. Her hands were shaking, not from cold but from the strange stillness that comes after everything collapses. She had done what she thought was right. She had told the truth. But the truth had a way of hollowing you out. The bailiff passed, guiding Ryan down the corridor in handcuffs. His head was lowered, the swagger completely gone. For a second, their eyes met, through the space between two deputies, through everything that had happened. Mom, he whispered, almost soundless. She took one small step forward, but stopped herself. It wasn't anger that held her back this time. It was understanding. He needed to feel the weight of what he'd done. The deputies turned him toward the elevator leading to the holding area. The steel doors slid shut with a low mechanical hiss. And that was the last sound she heard of her son that day. Inside the cell, Ryan sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at his hands. The same hands that once built model cars with his mother, now cuffed and scarred with soot marks that never quite washed away. He tried to replay the trial in his mind, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. Maybe it wasn't the night of the fire. Maybe it was earlier, the first time he stopped listening, the first time he decided rules were beneath him. He thought of his mother's words. Love without truth isn't love. It's blindness. And for the first time, he understood that she hadn't betrayed him in court. She had saved what was left of him. He rubbed his palms together until they burned. For months, he'd been sure he didn't care what anyone thought. But hearing her voice break, seeing her turn away, that hurt in a way he didn't know how to process. When the guard slid his dinner tray through the slot, Ryan didn't move. He just whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry." It was small, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but it was there. The first crack in a wall he'd spent years building. That night, Laura sat at her kitchen table, the same table that had once been the center of their family dinners. She stared at the empty chair across from her, tracing a finger over the grooves in the wood Ryan had carved as a kid, the small initials R+M, back when he still called her mom. The house was silent. No sirens, no shouting, no laughter. Just silence, heavy and complete. She didn't know if she would visit him. Maybe someday. Maybe when she believed he'd started to change. But for now, she just sat there in the quiet, knowing she had done what she had to do, even if it meant breaking her own heart. The prison transfer van left the county facility before sunrise. The road ahead stretched gray and endless, frost collecting on the windows as the city disappeared behind them. Inside, Ryan Harker sat in the second row, wrists bound, staring at his reflection in the glass. He barely recognized the face looking back. The smirk that once defined him was gone, replaced by a thin, uncertain line. His eyes looked older than 17. The other inmates in the van muttered to each other, but Ryan said nothing. He was thinking of his mother's words, "Love without truth isn't love, it's blindness." He had spent years laughing at her, mocking her lessons, pretending rules didn't apply. But now the silence was all he had left. When the van finally turned off the main road and pulled into the Elmwood Correctional Center for Youth Offenders, the sky had shifted from gray to white. Snow flurries drifted through the air, melting as they touched the asphalt. As the door clanged open, the guard called his name. "Harker, let's go!" Ryan stepped out, squinting against the cold. Ahead of him stood the complex, brick walls, barbed wire, and a narrow gate that buzzed open with a metallic groan. The sound echoed like a sentence being sealed. He hesitated only once, turning slightly to look back at the road they'd come from, but there was nothing there. No mother, no home, no second chances. That night, as the prison lights dimmed, he lay on his narrow cot and stared up at the ceiling. Somewhere down the corridor, another inmate shouted, and a guard barked an order in return. But eventually, even that faded. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that made you face every thought you'd buried. He thought of the laughter, the way it used to make him feel untouchable. He thought of the flames, the heat, the sirens, the way his mother screamed his name. And for the first time since that night, tears welled in his eyes. He tried to hold them back. He couldn't. In the darkness, Ryan whispered one thing to the empty cell. "I wish I could go home." But the truth, the one his mother had made him face, was that home wasn't a place anymore. It was gone, just like the boy he used to be. Outside the walls, Laura Harker stood in her small backyard, bundled in her coat, staring at the faint trail of smoke from the neighbor's chimney. It reminded her of that night, but softer somehow, less cruel. She whispered to herself, "He'll learn, one day." And as snow began to fall again, she let herself believe it, because believing was all she had left. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real courtroom emotions, not based on any true case or real events. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Ryan deserved 12 years? Or should his mother's words have earned him a chance at redemption? And if you were the judge, what sentence would you have given? Share your thoughts down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss another case like this one. Share this video with someone who believes every choice comes without consequence. And while you're here, tap the video appearing on your screen now to keep watching. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another story you'll never forget.